Mr. Sanjeev.
Mr. Duado. I'm good. I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm very good, thank you. Why are you good?
I'm on a deload.
Oh,
So my body's feeling really good. Physically feel good. But yeah, we'll get into it. Mentally, emotionally, not so good.
okay. Well, we're here to talk about training phases, and specifically 4 training phases. Right now, this podcast is coming out amidst the CrossFit Open, so we are currently going through one of these training phases. But there's been lots of things that have happened in the lead up and the build up to this moment. And I think when people start talking about training phases, training cycles, all gets a little bit confusing. Big words get thrown out. So we're just going to basically break this down and talk about what each of these training phases means, how to implement it into a training program, regardless if you're a CrossFitter or you're just anyone who's preparing for a certain goal. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our experiences and what we love and what we don't love.
Perfect. Sounds good. Let's dig into it. So what do we mean by these phases of training?
So we're referring to, we basically written down 4 phases of training. Now, there are actually more than this. There are things like accumulation and intensification phases, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about pre-competition, competition, tapers, and deloads. So we'll talk about the first one, which is a pre-competition phase. So this is the training that is leading right up into a competition. Now, a pre-competition phase can last anywhere between 1 week to multiple months. It can even last up to something like a year. If you're someone who's like an Olympian who's training for Olympics every 4 years, this cycle of training might be even longer. But basically what we're talking about is the period of time just before the competition starts. So if we're taking the competition as the CrossFit Open in this scenario, pre-competition phase was the weeks or the months before the Open started. The next phase is the competition phase.
Yep.
The competition phase is when we're actually competing. So a competition phase will vary in length depending on what the competition actually looks like. So if someone is preparing for a marathon, then the actual competition is just that one day, that one event running the marathon race. If someone is preparing for the CrossFit Open, well, the competition phase is 3 weeks where you're doing 1 to 2, maybe even 3 really hard workouts on a weekend for 3 consecutive weeks. Then you think about something like the quarterfinals, then we're looking at 5 days where you're doing multiple workouts each day, but you're only going to do that for one set of 5 days and then you're done. So the competition phase will be very, very different depending on who the individual is and what the goal they're preparing for. So the next 2, which is tapers and deloads, I think a lot of people get these 2 mixed up sometimes, and I actually did. I kind of thought they were the same thing for a really long time. But what a taper is something that will put in will basically slot in, generally speaking, between a pre-competition and a competition phase. So they go into a pre-competition phase. A taper generally means a reduction in training volume and a reduction in intensity to basically allow that individual to recoup, recover, and have enough resources to put towards the actual competition itself. And then the last one is a deload. So a deload is a very similar idea to a taper, but deloads can occur kind of multiple times throughout the year. So deloads are basically the same idea. It's a reduction in training volume, a reduction in training intensity. As to how long that period is, it can really vary. And, we typically put those in between training phases or training cycles throughout the year. It gives us a nice opportunity to kind of break up the year, to make sure we're not always doing really hard training, make sure we're staying healthy, and making sure our body actually has an opportunity to recover and adapt from the previous training cycle. I think it's a really important thing that we always have to remind people, is that adaptation only occurs when our body is in a recovery state. So if we're just training hard all the time, in that phase of training, exactly, we're not actually necessarily adapting or growing more muscle tissue or getting fitter, faster, stronger, whatever you're trying to do. It's when we have a period of time where we're actually resting, relaxing, where the body can actually repair and regenerate itself. That's where all the gains come in.
That's awesome. I think me being on this podcast is an irony, but we'll dig into that. But could you tell us a few key characteristics of each of those training phases? Like, what would one expect in each of those phases?
Yeah, nice. I think maybe we'll keep this. Let's keep this in this order. So we'll go pre-competition, competition, tapers, and deloads. So in a pre-competition phase, think about where this lies within the calendar. This is the period of training right before we go into a competition.
Mm-hmm.
So what that training needs to look like, it needs to look pretty damn similar to what the individual is going to do in their competition. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to prepare them physically, so we're basically trying to expose them to the demands of whatever the sport or the competition they're preparing for are. We're trying to develop them mentally as well, make sure they're aware of how the workouts or the tests or the event is going to feel, make sure they're confident with things like strategy, how to execute the movements they're going to have to do. So in a pre-competition phase, typically the training of all the different training phases and cycles within a year that an athlete might do, the pre-competition phase is the phase of training that looks the most like the competition. So if we take the CrossFit Open as an example, that means in your pre-competition phase, the movements that we're exposing an individual to in the lead up to the competition in that pre-comp phase, we're doing all the things that we might see in the CrossFit Open, right? So we are still maintaining our like heavy strength numbers in Olympic lifting and squatting and deadlifting and bench pressing, because the CrossFit Open will often test a 1 rep max or a heavy lift of some sort. We're also looking at the data of every CrossFit Open that we've seen and the movements that we typically see come up. So if you remember, Karan, what is a movement that we've seen show up the most in the CrossFit Open?
The movement I hate the most, thrusters.
You and I both, my friend. So something like a thruster, which has statistically appeared the most in every CrossFit Open, we need to be making sure that we're keeping thrusters are appearing in the program somewhere, right? And then, of course, we can look at statistically all the other movements that come up, and those that stack higher on the list of they have shown up repeatedly, we definitely make sure we're keeping those in the program. Something else we got to think about as well is when we're doing really hard workouts. So if an individual is thinking about doing their CrossFit Open workouts on a Saturday, then in the lead up in that pre-competition phase, we want to make sure that on a Saturday, we're doing really hard training. So we're preparing the body and the circadian rhythm for a really hard workout on that day. And, the rest of the week needs to factor in what the rest of the week might look like in the competition. So, if we're kind of forecasting that if we're going to do a really hard workout on Saturday, well, Monday, we're probably not going to be fully recovered. So Monday might be a slightly easier session. Maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, we get back to harder training. So in the pre-competition phase, we basically want to set all of that up. When we get into the actual competition phase itself, of course, it just depends so much on what the competition is. But really by this point in time, when the competition phase rolls around, the individual has developed all the fitness, and it's really just about performing now. So in a competition phase, we're not really trying to improve an individual's fitness. We're really just trying to maintain and hold on to all that good work that we put in to previous training cycles and phases leading up until this point. And really, we're trying to put as much of our energy and resources into just doing the competition. So we'll keep on using the CrossFit Open as our example, right? So if, let's say, we'll use you as an example, Karan, how many times do you plan on doing the CrossFit Open workouts?
This year, I'd say once.
Okay. Do you know what day you're going to be doing that on?
Friday morning.
Okay, so if you're going to be doing your workouts on Friday morning, well, then we know in the competition phase, we want to make sure that the rest of your week is not taking away from your ability to give your best performance on that Friday. So what that might mean is, Monday, Tuesday, which is a little bit further away from the competition, we might be able to do some harder training. But as we get into kind of like Wednesday, Thursday, we're starting to pull back on the intensity. Friday, we crush the open. And then, Saturday and Sunday, maybe we do more hard training or we start to kind of pull back on intensity. So basically the competition phase, the really most important thing to understand is the priority is the competition.
Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that in a competition phase, they're trying to compete and go really hard, but they're also trying to work on their fitness and improve themselves in other areas. And what starts to happen is their bucket just overflows, right? They just put too much on their body, too much on their plate. Because remember, we have to remember that when we compete at any level, the moment you step foot onto a competition floor where there's a leaderboard, there's judges, there's people cheering for you, there's all that fun stuff that comes with competition, the intensity of that moment is considerably higher than a typical training day, right? Even if you're not going 110% and that much harder. Just the sheer like stimulation and mental stress of that is so much higher than what it's like for us in our everyday. And so we just have to remember, because of that, because of that added intensity of the workout, the rest of our week has to factor that in. So that's a competition phase. Tapers, what we're talking about is characteristics here is, like we said, like it's a reduction of training volume and or intensity. Now, the reason I say and or is sometimes it's appropriate to keep the intensity high, right? So what we mean by that is, so if we were trying to do, we wanted to do some back squats in a tapering phase for you, we might still push to like a heavy set of 3, but we might just do one set. We're going to do a quick build, hit one set, and then we'll finish there. Whereas in a training phase, you might do 2 to 3 tough sets. So in a taper, we want to reduce intensity and or volume. So let's have another example. If that's an example of reduction in volume, but intensity stays high, we could also reduce intensity but keep the volume the same. So what I mean by that is that we will still do 4 to 5 sets of an exercise, but we're never really going to push anywhere close to failure. We're working with lower percentage work, just greasing the groove, keeping technique in there, touching on positions and technique, but we're not trying to get fitter, stronger, faster. And then, of course, a more aggressive strategy would be where we're reducing both those things. We're reducing volume and we're reducing intensity. But I think the main thing to remember in a taper is that in a taper period, we're not trying to get better, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that when I say we're not trying to get better, we're not trying to create physiological adaptation. So we're not trying to increase more muscle mass. We're not trying to increase absolute strength. We're not trying to increase power. We're not trying to increase cardiorespiratory fitness, because those things take a lot of resources, right? Instead, we're accepting that we're going to try and maybe just give those things a bit of a rest, chill out, maybe even just maintenance mode. Things that we can definitely improve in a taper period is like things like technique, like skill work. We can work on mobility. We can build confidence with things like strategies and executions and movements. So that's why I wanted to kind of just backtrack a second and say that you don't necessarily, a taper or a deload phase still gives you an opportunity to get better, but we're just not looking for physiological adaptations. And then, of course, we've got deloads. So the deload, very similar to taper, a reduction in volume or intensity. Now, with deloads, we have typically 2 types of deloads. We have deloads which are planned. So we kind of like factor these into the year way ahead of time, typically like maybe halfway between a training cycle or in between training cycles. And then the other one is a forced deload, which is what I am currently going through right now. So a forced deload is basically where, you're just having to take a bit of a break with your training because maybe like life is just challenging for you at the moment. Maybe you picked up a little niggle or an injury, which is something that I'm dealing with right now. And you're just having to force yourself to take a bit of a backward step. But same idea, right? It's relative to what you've been doing. It's a reduction in volume and intensity. Thoughts?
I think we have a brief understanding now of, I guess, when one would program each of these training phases around a competition, right? Especially with the example of the CrossFit Open. Could we dive into a bit more detail of, like, let's say in a season, right? Let's say a CrossFitter that's going through maybe regional competitions later in the year, someone that might be a hybrid athlete that does do CrossFit training, but then wants to do competitions like high rocks or powerlifting comps, or just a normal CrossFitter that progresses through the season with CrossFit competitions, right? So how would, I guess, one structure, let's say an example of a year training, and how would you slot these different phases in the year?
Yeah, nice. So the thing, as a coach or an athlete who's writing these programs, the thing we must have clarity on is what is the 1, maybe 2 competitions in the year that you want to be at your absolute best for. We have to start there, right? Which is really the goal setting process. And so once we have identified the 1, maybe 2 competitions a year that we want to be at our best, we actually put that into the calendar and then we work backwards from there. So basically let's kind of put into practice what we've just been talking about. So let's say we have an individual whose goal, let's keep on using you as an example, actually, which is good, which is your goal this year is to qualify for the quarterfinals and to compete in the quarterfinals. So we'll just work with that to start. So let's say we've just finished the 2023 season. So this is back now in March, April time, 2023. You just wrapped up your season. You're sitting down now and you're like, okay, how do I improve for next year? I want to change something up, and I want to be even better when this time rolls around in 12 months time. So we set the goal of being at your best for the quarterfinals next year. So what we write down on your calendar, and you know, for me, I'm looking at a spreadsheet where I have, you know, each week of the year written out on a spreadsheet. I'm going to go scroll all the way down to the week that Karan wants to be at his very best, which is the quarterfinals 2024. And so there, I'm going to make a little note and say, this is going to be my competition phase. All right. So I know at this point in time, I want Karan to be his absolute best. And then we literally just work backwards from there. So we've already talked about this, right? What happens just before a competition phase? We're going through a pre-competition phase. Well, we actually know that just before a competition, we have a taper. So I can even write down and make a little note in your calendar in a year in advance to say the week before the quarterfinals 2024, Karan is going to move through a taper week where I'm going to basically reduce his volume and intensity. Then I work a week back from there. Okay, this is probably going to be Karan's pre-competition phase. Now, how long is his pre-competition phase? I'm not really sure, but you know, I'm going to just guess based on this year. You know, Karan did like a 5-6 week competition phase, maybe even a little bit longer. I'm going to assume that we're going to go through like a 6-week pre-competition phase, which, to be honest, is going to take us right to the start of the Open. Right. Yeah. So what happens where the quarterfinals is you know, we go through the Open for 3 weeks, then we have another few weeks, and then the quarterfinal starts. So if you think about that, it's about 6 weeks. So really, week 1 of the CrossFit Open for someone who wants to peak for the quarterfinals is going to be the start of their pre-competition phase. And then what happens before that? We're still working backwards on our calendar here. Okay, well, before the pre-competition phase starts, he probably would have been using some hard training up until this point. I'm probably going to give him a deload, right? So I'm going to factor in one to 2 weeks before that. I'm going to slot in deload. And then when I look at that now, I've now taken care of and implemented a pre-competition, a competition, a taper, and a deload phase into Karan's, in a year's time, into his calendar already. And that's basically kind of set. And then, of course, then we're going to think, well, shit, we've still got 9 more months that we have to fill up with training. That's where we would look at things like accumulation, intensification cycles. Maybe Karan's doing some like friendly little competitions here and there. He wants to do a powerlifting comp. He wants to do high rocks. Then we can create these kind of like mini peaking cycles where we're doing mini pre-competition, mini tapers, mini competition phases throughout the year, but we're not putting that much energy and effort into it. We're just kind of doing, you know, rather than it being a 6-week cycle like we do for the Open, we're doing like 1 to 2 week cycles throughout the year. So we're still giving him a chance to express himself when he does these competitions, but it's not taken away from the biggest goal, which is I want Karan to be at his very best for the CrossFit Open. Or for the quarterfinals. So basically, you know, what we do here at the Process Programming is when the season finishes, you know, when everyone's done with the Open, everyone's done with quarterfinals, we're not really worrying about semi-final athletes because that's, you know, a very small minority of our members. So we allow those guys to continue to prep, but we sit down as a team in this office, we write on the whiteboard, we map out 12 months of the year. So we basically go, you know, April, May, June, July, blah, 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 and all the way to the next CrossFit Open. And we basically do exactly that. You know, we write down for each month of the year, let's break this into some training cycles. Now, we don't go into the minutia of what that training cycle is going to look like. We just say, well, okay, to start the year, we're probably going to spend quite a bit of time rebuilding, right? So we're going to go through lots of single arm, single leg movements, some lower intensity work, probably reduce the amount of kipping volume we're doing, probably take down the Olympic lifting stuff a little bit, probably do some like longer, slower pieces with our training. And we're probably going to do that for around 12 weeks. So we just write down, okay, we're going to do like a long 12-week rebuilding cycle, which we would call accumulation in fancy coaching terms. Okay, then after we've done that, you know, kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of what an individual might be feeling. Okay, you know, we've just done 12 weeks of slow, less intense work. They're probably going to be hungry to want to like do something a little bit more. And of course, at the end of the day, we still do want to expose them to hard stuff because that's what the sport requires. So, okay, we're going to go through then maybe like an intensification cycle where we crank it up a little bit. Now, that intensification cycle is not going to be anywhere near as long as the accumulation cycle because intensification work is hard, right? So if we're doing really hard stuff for too long at the start of the season, we're just going to burn out. We're going to pick up injuries and all the things we don't want to be getting at that point of the season.
Be like half or 1/3.
Exactly. Yeah. I typically, a rule of thumb is my intense training is roughly 50% of my less intense training. I will spend most of the year doing less intense training. And then basically just flip flop between those two things for essentially 9 months.
Yeah.
And then that's going to basically take us right up to the point of when our pre-competition cycle is starting.
That's great. So we go between accumulation and intensification, and someone could also, I guess, time those two phases in the pre-competition phase. I guess with competitions, that might be, I guess, the same sport if, the sport is CrossFit. Talking about that, what else would you take into consideration when programming, I guess, for a CrossFit athlete?
Those kind of things, yeah.
Yeah.
So much. I mean, obviously, there's so many things when you're sitting down to write these things out.
Yeah.
There's actually probably more questions we have to ask as a coach than like, what is your goal?
Yeah.
What is the main goal? There's other things we need to factor in, like travel.
Yeah.
Like, Karan, are you thinking about going on any holidays, taking some time off? Do you want to do some other things? Because, if you said, yep, I'm going to be going traveling for 3 weeks in this period of time, probably not going to have access to a gym.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm basically going to factor in you've taken care of my deload phase for me. Okay, so for this 3 weeks in the year, Karan's going to have a deload. So that means I can factor in the training before and after that to basically account for the fact that, okay, we can push him a little bit leading up to this point because he's going to have 3 weeks off. And then he's going to feel super fresh at the end of those 3 weeks where we can start cranking up and building his training back in. Past experiences as well. If someone like yourself has, doesn't enjoy deload phases, then we've got to be smart about how we do that.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't want to probably do it too often. But if we don't want to do it too often because we know there's going to be, negative things that come with that, then that means our intensification cycles can't be so long. So, someone who really, like me, loves deloading, then you can afford to push that athlete a bit more because they're going to take their deload pretty seriously. If you have an individual that doesn't enjoy deloads, well, you got to be a bit more careful about how long you push that athlete for because that deload phase is going to come around, and generally it's not going to be a very good time. Again, like other competitions, like if there's other little things you want to do in the year, something like a high rocks competition. Let's say you wanted to do a high rocks in November. And then we got to look at the sport of high rocks and be like, okay, well, if someone is preparing for a high rocks race, what type of training are they going to be doing a lot of? They're going to be doing a lot of running, and they're going to be doing a lot of endurance work. Typically, a high rocks race isn't demanding much from a heavy absolute strength standpoint. There's no Olympic lifting in there. There's no gymnastics in there. So we've got to also factor in, well, this phase of training as he leads into his high rocks, there's not going to be much like of the other CrossFit movements. There's going to be a lot of basic CrossFit movements, burpees, wall balls, sled pushes, rowing, skiing, lots of running, of course. So that means, in the phases leading up into that point, the phases after it, I don't want to just give you more of the same movement you've been doing a ton of, right? I want to overload on all the other stuff that you're not going to be doing in a high rock cycle. So there's so many things. Is there anything else you can think of?
Yeah, I think, I guess with the competition, your training would change if you are not just sticking with one sport, you're a hybrid athlete and you're doing other comps like powerlifting, weightlifting, or high rocks. I think you can supplement your training. Of course, that will take away from, I guess, becoming a better, well-rounded CrossFitter. But I still feel like being a CrossFit athlete, if you are doing the other sports, it's going to feed back into the sport of CrossFit. And I guess also like looking at an individual's weaknesses and like running cycles for that in the off season or just after the quarterfinals or when their season is done. Taking a month off of training as well for, I guess, higher level athletes or athletes that have higher training age, and that might actually be something.
Like a really long deload phase.
That might be. I mean, that's something that I haven't done. I don't know if I'll ever do. But I think at the highest level, or people that have a higher training age, I think taking a long extended period of time is not only just good for the body, but I think it's for longevity of enjoying the sport, important mentally and emotionally as well.
I think if you look at all the athletes that have experienced like long, fruitful careers in their sports, like Rafa Nadal's, Roger Federer's, LeBron James's, all those guys who, and then even footballers like Cristiano Ronaldo's, Messi, Thiago Silva. I've just been watching this World Cup. Have you been watching that World Cup thing on Netflix?
No, I haven't. No.
Basically, it follows all the football captains from the World Cup, and like it shows how many 35-plus-year-olds are still playing football professionally in the World Cup. It's pretty crazy.
Okay.
But all those guys who've had extended careers, they take their off seasons pretty damn seriously.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they're not doing like a Ricky Hatton. I don't know if you know Ricky Hatton. He was a boxer who basically would binge and get like really fat in the off season and then shred. These guys are still looking after themselves in the off season, but they really do take the time off part, really seriously. And I think that, the longer you go in the sport, especially if you're someone who has really long seasons, like if you're someone who competes at semifinals in the games, it's a long old season. You've got the Open, you've got the quarterfinals, you've got semifinals, and you've got the games, and maybe through a few competitions thrown in between there. Generally speaking, the more consecutive years you do that for, the longer your off seasons kind of need to get if you want to keep on doing it. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's something else you really got to factor in. I want to go back to the thing you were talking about for the hybrid athlete. So you were saying, like there's the other types of training could be factored in and benefit. What did you mean by that?
So let's take myself as an example, right? So obviously I follow LPC, I follow the elite training program, I do the AM and PM session, but there have been instances where I would maybe sub out once a week or twice a week. I would take out a session and then throw in a high rocks training session, or I'd throw in a pure powerlifting session. It's not going to have, I guess, direct impact as me as a CrossFitter, but it's going to feed back in and bleed back in because it's all part of the sport.
Yeah, I think that's where the concept of specificity has to be thought about. Generally speaking, when we think about, let's stick with the CrossFit Open because it's such a good, it's a great example because we pretty much know the movements that show up every year in the CrossFit Open. Are you going to be programmed a low bar back squat?
Nope.
Probably not. The CrossFit Open, the sport doesn't specify what type of squat you need to be doing. So therefore, in a pre-competition cycle, is there much place for low bar back squatting in the program? Probably say not so much. I'd rather that athlete be doing the back squat variation that they feel most comfortable with, that they're probably going to use in a competition. However, in the off season, when we're a long way away from competition, a low bar back squat might be a really good thing to add into a CrossFitter's program because they're going to be touching on muscles and movement patterns and positions that they wouldn't normally get exposure to. And, if you did a bit of that every off season or every preseason, over the years, you're going to develop a really strong low bar back squat, which basically means that athlete now has multiple squat positions and loads of different muscles and tendons and positions that they can call upon when they need to use in a squat position. So I think this is where we have to think about that specificity, right? I even think something like high rocks. I think for me, like when I went through 2 years ago, even this year when we did the relay, like going through 2 mini phases where we did 8 to 12 weeks of just prepping for a high rocks comp, where we basically doing running twice a week. I thought that actually was great for me in the sport of CrossFit.
Yeah.
Because I don't do it anywhere near enough running. It gave me a lot of confidence with running again. Definitely helped with my cardiorespiratory system. And it means that things like shuttle runs and stuff now, I feel a lot more comfortable with because of that whole phase. But I also know that, like, I did loads of burpees. I did loads of wall balls in that cycle as well. Spent quite a bit of time on things like rowers and ski ergs and sled work, which we never really do sled work in CrossFit. So getting exposure to that in the high rocks race actually probably served me as a CrossFitter. And then I think there's another part to it, which is like the training process has to be fun. And I think when you're newer to CrossFit, just doing classic CrossFit is really damn fun because there's so many damn movements. But I'm about to do my 11th, well, actually when this episode comes out, doing my 11th, touch wood, hopefully my knee, CrossFit Open. You've done 11 years of chest to bar pull-ups. You've done 11 years of muscle-ups, and 11 years of handstand walking, 11 years of thrusters. For me, like, I actually enjoy adding other aspects into my training, other elements, other modalities, other things. It just keeps the training process more fun for me. And because I've got 11 years of experience on doing all those movements, I can afford to take multiple months away of not really doing them and know that I'm still going to be able to step back in and pretty much execute it to a pretty good degree. I don't have that fear or that worry of my body forgetting how to do the movement or having to relearn the technique again.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the point of, I guess, at the higher end of the sport, or people with a higher training age, right? They can or they should be taking off for a longer period of time in their off season. Whereas if you're newer to the sport or a newer training age, you just have so much to work on that you can actually be attacking those weaknesses. Obviously, given that you've come out of the last season injury free, and you don't really need as much of a big deload.
Yeah, and you should be like, if you wanna get good at this
You just
sport,
need time.
you need to start and you need to
Yeah.
do all of it, because there is a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're putting too much on your plate and trying to do lots of different skills and lots of different sports and peak for all these different things, and your progress within the sport of CrossFit is just going to be a lot. So just because of how much variety there is in the movements of our sport. So that's a really good point. Yeah.
Do we dive into our individual?
Well, yeah, let me ask you.
Yeah.
Pre-competition, competition, tapers and deloads.
Yes.
I'm gonna start with the one that you love the most.
Okay.
Like, are you someone? I guess that the obvious question here is like, do you love competing? Do you love competition phases, or are you someone who prefers like training phases?
That's a very hard question. So I thought I was gonna have to pick, one from the four. But if you ask me to pick one from the two, which is either pre-competition or competition, I'd have to go with competition.
Yeah.
I think, putting myself out there, whether it be in front of people or just on a online leaderboard, and just seeing where I stack up. At the end of the day, I do enjoy the process. Me and Skulk were talking about this earlier today. I'm all about the journey and the process, but I like to be working towards something and having a result or outcome. It's like getting into a car or a ship. There's a destination, and then along the way you enjoy the view and the journey, right? But it's like you don't want to get into a car or a ship and don't know where it's going. It's harder to just enjoy the journey, just aimlessly wandering about. So I think for me, not just like working towards something and progressing and trying to become better, but just the feeling of like, I don't know, the lights, everything that my body goes through mentally, physically. People watching, there's a camera in your face. It just pushes me, and I guess pushes me to my limits and tests me on different aspects, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally. So I think I'd have to pick. If I had to pick the two, it's very close. I'd pick during competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that my least favorite phase is a pre-competition phase.
Okay.
Like where I'm having to do hard shit, but I don't actually get to do the sport. And I'd agree with you. My favorite, I really love training. I do really love training, but it's like it's a love-hate relationship with competition. I love what comes from doing competitions, like the amazing experiences, the shared like camaraderie that when you're going through it with other people, the connection, the memories, and of course like the lessons. When you're doing something really hard in anything in life, that it just provides a really amazing opportunity for learning. And so I love what comes from competition, but the actual like competition itself, there's a lot of shit things that come with competition. There's like the sleepless nights, there's like the crippling anxiety, the like the mental battles that you're having, in the lead up to competition. Then there's like the pain and discomfort. There's like the injuries that often come, like the injuries and pain, and like the lack of health that normally comes with competitions, because you're basically just in survival mode, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff I don't like. And it's like, if I'm honest, right, I love the outcome and the result, which makes the process totally worthwhile, but I can't say that I love it when I'm in the process.
Right.
Most of the time when I'm leading into a comp, I just want to like get the comp going. I want to do it now.
Yeah.
And like having to go through the hard stuff, I don't like. And I think that's typically why, as I've gotten older in the sport of CrossFit, I have probably not set myself up for success as much as I used to, because in the pre-competition phases where I should be doing hard training to replicate the competition, I'm just not willing to do it. It's kind of like the competition doesn't mean enough to me anymore, or I'm willing to sacrifice a lot of areas in my life in the pre-competition phase. So instead, I'll kind of just coast through a pre-competition phase. I'll make sure that I'm like ticking the boxes and doing a bit of intensity here and there, exposing myself to all the movements. But really, I'm kind of like, I'm very aware that when the competition starts, it's going to be a lot more intensity than I've been used to. And there's obviously there's bad things that come with that, right? It means
Yeah.
that like my body gets massively shocked and then I'm a mess for like a week,
2 months
sometimes
after.
months in the wake of it. It means that I'm not that aware of where my capacity is. Because I haven't been pushing training hard, I get into a comp and it means I'll normally undercook it, right?
Yeah.
I'll underperform and have lots left in the tank just because I
Yeah.
don't know where my limits are because I haven't pushed myself hard enough. Or I could get it horribly wrong, which I don't normally do,
Yeah.
but I could just go way too hard because, my perception of what I'm capable of is skewed and I think I can do way more than I can. So obviously those are things I'm well aware of and I kind of accept. Okay, Ed, you're being a bit of a pussy right now, and you probably should be going harder if you want to set yourself up for success in and after the competition. However, you're not willing to do it, so you just got to have to embrace that when it comes.
Yeah, though I think the way I see, I guess the pre-competition phase is like delayed gratification towards the big event.
Yeah.
And I'm all for delayed gratification and just like going through the process and enjoying it while I can. And obviously, I'm just grateful that I can do what I can do. And, even with the pre-competition phase, you're still progressing and getting better. It's just that you get to try to showcase it on a bigger stage during the comp. But at the end of the day, I enjoy the pre-competition phase as well because at the bottom line is you're a better version of who you were the previous day, just with your regular training. It's just that gets magnified, or there are more opportunities to learn and grow in the competition phase.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a choice. You're going to have wins and lessons. And
I mean, when I was younger, I'd probably say in the first like 5 years of CrossFit, so this is like 2014, 2013, 2018, I used to love the pre-competition phase. I used to love it when it was like, right, training is about to get really hard.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put myself in the bin like 2 to 3 times a week. And I can't wait for that. But that was because of a part of me was so addicted to the stress of really hard things. And then now I'm at a point where I'm like, oh, man, I'm gutted this time. I can't believe this time of year's roll around again and I got to pick it up, And it's just because like I don't enjoy the pain and suffering as much anymore. Whereas back then, I kind of wore it like a badge of honor, right? It was like, it felt good to be like sore and painful and in bits and not sleeping. But now I'm like, I just don't want that at all. Why are you laughing? What are you thinking right now?
Because I'm like, oh shit, Ed had that phase because I'm in that phase right now. And I think you can see a lot of that in me. And you see like a younger version of yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm just laughing in my mind because like, shit, he's just describing me right now.
Yeah. But I think a big part of that was because back then when I did do that, I could bounce back. I would still come back and recover and be able to do it again and again and again and again. And that's the beautiful thing about being a bit younger and having a bit more resilience, just naturally, right? When I look at all the other things that was happening in my life outside of the gym, it was horrendous. Like I was working stupidly long hours. My sleep routines and quality and quantity was awful. Nutrition was terrible. I was getting smashed on a weekend every weekend. So recovery was so suboptimal. But with all that in mind, I was still able to handle that for multiple years. And then, and that's the thing. If you're a young athlete and like you got to utilize that period of your life to be able to handle more because it's not because you're able to handle it. There's nothing about it necessarily makes it unhealthy, right? Because your body's actually able to physically respond and adapt and improve. And it's why, when young athletes who have the resilience and they have age on their side are also investing time and energy into all those other things, they're just creating such a big bucket to be able to handle so much more, right? And if you can handle more, those athletes are going to be able to, develop and progress at a much, much faster rate than the athlete who's not. So yeah, it all matters.
Yeah, it's a season of life, right? Because I guess I will also one day move past this phase of my life. And I think for me right now, it's about trying to squeeze every ounce of potential that I can in this season of my life before, I get to where you are in your life as well.
But, it's interesting because, Ant is now 34.
34, yeah.
And, I entered this current season of life probably at, 32, 33, where I was like, okay, I just can't handle that intensity anymore. But, he's past that and he can still handle it, and he
Yeah.
loves it. And then the most important thing is it's a priority of his
Yeah.
where he's willing to do it. You know, he sets up his life to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I don't set up my life to be able to do that. So, you know, if you're listening to this, you're thinking, okay, when I get to 35, it's all going to go to shit. Absolutely not. You know, if this is something that you want to continue to prioritize, yes, your training's going to have to look a bit different, and you probably are going to have to step up other areas of life, because whether you think you're invincible, you know, whether you think you're Superman or Superwoman or not, like, resilience is on a decline.
Yeah.
And it is for everyone. And that's nothing you can do, or you can't wish it to be any other way. But physiologically, we are declining, and our ability to handle what we used to be able to is always going to be going down. But if you build a big enough base, and you know your ability to handle much more at younger age is going to be higher, then who says you can't keep on doing really hard things for a really long time?
Yeah. I guess I know that Ant hates to use the word sacrifice. I think it's just, I guess, priorities and where you want to put your time and energy into. And there's no wrong or right. It's just what matters to that person and that point of time of their lives.
Yeah, and you just got to have clarity on what
Yeah,
that is.
and why you're doing it, and it's important to you then.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Right now, you've said that you enjoy the competition phase the
Yeah.
most. Which do you least enjoy?
If I had to pick one, it's definitely between deload and taper, right? But I wouldn't necessarily say it's the taper, because on the back end of a taper, you know there's a competition phase coming. So there's excitement. There's,
It feels more purposeful.
yes, you know why you're doing it. And I mean, I know why you do a deload as well, but there's something coming. And you know you just have to. You can't there have been instances where I've self-sabotaged as well.
Yeah, me
But
too.
you know you can't do that anymore if you want to be performing at your physical peak. So I'm not going to say the taper, because there's excitement there. I would say it's the deload. I have historically struggled with deloads. I mean, before I was a coach and before I was a member at Coastal, the concept of deload did not exist to me. I was, and you know, when you first start training and you're a newbie, you're seeing these newbie gains. You can keep, I guess, progressively overloading, you know, week by week by week. But then you're eventually gonna hit a plateau. You're eventually going to, you know, pick up an injury, and I have done that. I've picked up injuries, you know, stupidly. Like, in hindsight, I could have avoided. But yeah, I would say I'd have to pick the deload phase, because historically I've not dealt with them very well. Since
When you say you haven't dealt with them well, what is it like? What are the things, the feelings and thoughts that you're processing
yeah,
when you see a deload coming up, or when you're in a deload or supposed to be in a deload?
so a few things is, so now as a coach, I know the importance of a deload. I definitely deload my clients, and we deload our members here as well. I see the validity in it. For me, I just struggle to implement a deload. I know I've implemented deloads and I've felt physically great. I feel really good right now physically, and I know, and I still feel there's a lot more this week and the next. I'll be deloading and tapering before the open, and I know that I'm still peaking, and I know by the time I get to next Friday, my body will be physically primed to perform next Friday. It's more so, I guess, for me on the mental and emotional side that I struggle with the deload, and a few of the thoughts and feelings that come to my mind are, or that I experience are, with thoughts, it's like, it sounds stupid, but it's like, I'm not progressing. This is 2 weeks away from the gym. This is not away from the gym, but 2 weeks.
It's a wasted opportunity.
Yes, it's a wasted time. I'm not bettering myself. I'm not increasing the weight on the bar. I'm not, you know, getting fitter. But I know better. I know that this time you could be working on things like getting efficient at movements. You can get better at the other things outside the gym that will get you fitter in terms of recovery protocols, sleep, nutrition, all of that. It's easier said than done, because these thoughts, like, you know what's better for you, you know wrong and right, but you still experience these thoughts. And I guess when it comes to emotions as well, I think I put out a not I think I put out a post recently on Instagram, and I spoke about, I guess, my toxic relationship with training. And
Yeah, so that was an interesting post, because I felt like there was a lot more that you were there was like on the tip of your tongue
yeah,
to share. But yeah, maybe if you just tell us a gist of what that post was.
yeah. So that post came earlier this week, and you know, last week, I think the last few weeks I've been talking about me wanting a deload, and I knowing that I need a deload. And I kept telling myself, okay, I'll push for one more week. I'll push for one more week. And the time has come now. It's just before the Open. I don't want to repeat my mistake from last year, where I got to the Open in the quarterfinals and I felt like shit. I couldn't perform at all. So I'm like, okay, this is the best time to deload, right? And I started my deload on Sunday or Monday, whenever the week starts, right? And these thoughts and these feelings came back to me. And I had a conversation on the way back with Adele. We're walking back to the MTR with Ant. And what I post on Instagram are usually things that I am thinking about in the moment, or things that I'm reflecting on that I'm ready to share with, I guess, the public. And I usually put a clip of my a training clip, and I write a caption regarding whatever thoughts and emotions I'm going through. And on that day, we spoke about relationship with deloads and like how I feel, and I know, like I'm aware of it. I guess now I'm in the phase of I accept it, and now I'm in the phase of trying to fix it, right? So I know I have a toxic relationship with training, and
What do you mean? Why do you have a toxic relationship with training?
I attach a lot of my self-worth and identity to how I perform in training. And I don't let this reflect, of course, in my job. When I'm coaching, when I'm on the floor with clients or in a group class, that does not show at all. I'm a professional. But the team members know, like the closest team members like yourself and Skulk, they know when I'm in a bad mood, it's because something's gone wrong, or I have performed bad, or something's happened in training which I didn't want it to, not the way I wanted to go, right? So that I would say, if I don't perform well in training, my mood is directly affected, and that is not healthy. For example, last Friday when I beat you in the
Tied with me.
in the Saturday tester, that made my whole day. That's pretty sad. Like
I'm happy it made your day, mate.
it made my day, right? So if one workout win over Ed makes your entire day, that just shows that it tells me that there's definitely a void in my life that I'm trying to fill through training. And when I feel like I'm not progressing, when I feel like I'm not making progress in my training, or my training goes bad, then I'm just, there's no meaning. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, I guess I just want to challenge you a bit.
Yeah.
I want to challenge you on the idea that you beating me in a workout and that being the highlight of your day is a stupid thing. Because I'm going to say I don't think it is a stupid thing. And the reason, because context is important here. The context that's important is the fact that you've always used me as a benchmark. And that's, so you should. Like, I've been doing this sport for much longer than you have. I kick your ass basically every single day. And so therefore, when you do have an opportunity to win a workout, it's evidence that the work that you're putting in is moving you towards the goal that you're trying to achieve. And so, mate, you should celebrate that.
Yeah.
Like 100%. That was just evidence.
Yeah.
And of course, you could accumulate evidence every day, right? It was like, Ed, how many strict answer pushes do you do? 5. How many do you do? 25. Okay, so technically you're accumulating wins all the time, but when it's like in a workout and it's a Saturday tester and we're both trying pretty hard, for sure, that's a very different scenario,
100%,
which you don't normally get to chalk up wins. So I want to challenge you and say, I don't think that's a stupid thing.
Yeah.
I think you have clarity on what your goals are, and one of your goals outside of your professional life is you want to be the best athlete you can be. Now we all have to have litmus tests, things that confirm whether what we're doing is moving us in the right direction, and one of those things is beating me in a workout. And tying with me in a workout. And because you did, mate, that's confirmation that there's a lot of hard work that's gone in to getting you to that point to be able to actually tie with me in a workout.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a stupid thing at all. I guess where I would, because I can relate to, you haven't said it, but what I think you mean when you say you have a toxic relationship with training, is yes, you attach a lot of your self-worth to what you can do physically with your body and what your body might look like because of a result of what you do. And so therefore the toxic result of training is that training becomes the vehicle which you think is going to make you more happy, when we actually know that more than anyone that that's actually not what's going to massively contribute to your overall happiness and well-being. Right. So therefore we have an reluctance to want to take time off training, because the fear that we have is if we don't train, then the one thing that's most important to me and what makes people like me is going to get worse. And if my training and my body and my physical ability gets worse, less people are going to like me and less people are going to respect me, less people are going to fill in the blank. Would you say that's how accurate am I there?
Um, I would say that's part of it. I wouldn't say that's all of it. The reason why I say that is I would say that I dedicate a lot of time and energy to training. Like
Mm.
you said, that is definitely a priority. It's just that when I'm not training, like let's say right now I'm not doing PM sessions, I don't know what to do because I just have so much free time, right? So I haven't set up things outside of training for me to like a hobby or relationships, or, I've lost a lot of friendships and relationships because of the lifestyle that I live. So I think, like you said, there should be there are other things in life that are also important, that are more meaningful, that will, I guess, bring happiness to you. And I don't have those things because I haven't invested enough time and energy into those things.
Mm.
So when I have that free time where I would typically be training and I'm not, it's like, shit, what do I do with myself?
Yeah. Have you thought about maybe the areas of your life that you don't get to do when you're so committed in other periods of the year with your training? Do you not think that this is maybe a good time for you to be able to do those things, like you said, like connecting with other people, building relationships, doing other hobbies and stuff?
Yeah, 100%.
That's something that I actually think are really important things with deloads. And I
Yeah.
know when I have a deload coming up, I want to make sure I use my time that I don't normally have that are dedicated toward training to do the other things to fill up my cup in other areas. Because I know when the deload's done, I want to get back to the thing that is really important to me, which is going to be training for 90 minutes every day.
Yeah, no, I agree with
I mean,
that.
I when I think back to, because I used to have the reason I think I, I'm always interested in hearing what's going through your mind when I see you acting, behaving, feeling a certain way is because, like you said, like younger me is exactly you.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I wouldn't change it in any other way. And I don't know if you've noticed that my stance on giving you advice with all this stuff, I backed off a lot more.
Make me go through it.
And actually, I want to let you just go through it.
Yeah.
And because that's the only way you're going to learn. I realized pretty early on that you're a guy that learns through experience, which, to be honest, I think is 99% of the world.
Yeah.
Because, we all think we're an exception to the rule. And until we're proved otherwise, we're going to continue to think we're an exception to the rule, right? Because at the end of the day, the athlete who can train more, take less breaks, is going to be better than the athlete that takes more breaks. So, I mean, that's a fact of life, right? So for me now, I actually encourage you to do the things that you say you want to do, and it's just let you learn the lessons yourself. And not to say they're always going to be bad, but good lessons as well. But when I think about when I had a really poor relationship with deloading, and I knew, I could articulate the reasons for deloads easily. I was really good at programming for my clients. I knew how to implement into a training year, but when it came to my own deloads, I really struggled with it. And I remember my coach would write me a deload week. I mean, like the week after a 5-week open, when the opens were 5 weeks, and I would refuse to do it. I would justify and say, but I feel really good. Why do I need to take a deload? I'd much rather just use this time to train. And part of it was, like you said, why would I don't want it. This is just lost time. I want to be better. And therefore I want to use this time to train because I feel like I can. But and then another part of it for me was like my body image. I felt like if I wasn't training, then my body would be losing muscle and it'd be gaining fat, which is just so crazy to think. But listen, that's body dysmorphia to a T, right? So I thought that if I wasn't training, my body and all the gains, and I factored a lot of my identity to the way that I looked. So if yours is more about how you perform and what you can do, mine was less about how I performed, although that was still important. It was more about what I looked like. And so that was the fuel behind why I wanted to train more and more and more and deload less. So and I would look for as much evidence from the universe to tell me that my hunch, which is I don't need to deload, is true. So, you'd have these niggles and injuries and I would just
hit a PR.
I just tell myself like that's not really there. Like that's not really an injury. It's not
Mm.
actually that bad. It's not actually an issue. Like that's not going to actually become anything worse. And you tell yourself these things to justify to yourself
Yeah.
why you don't need to take that time off. And I would say at that point in time, like those are the main driving factors, and the whole idea of delayed gratification just didn't exist in my
Yeah.
eyes. It was all about now. I really struggled to have foresight to
Yeah.
think how skipping this deload now is going to help me in 6 months time.
That's a bit ironical to me because like I'm all for delayed gratification. I think I had a light bulb moment. I'm like, wait, if I actually take a deload, it's actually delaying gratification. Because I was just thinking now when you were speaking about the feeling I get when I train, when I'm in pain or I'm suffering or I'm going to hard workout or I'm sweating, that rush or that endorphin feeling, I think I'm addicted to that as well.
Yeah.
And when I'm deloading, I'm not pushing as hard, I'm not sweating as much, I'm not breathing as hard, or I'm not lifting as heavy weights, and that feeling's not there.
Yeah.
So I think there's something there as well. And now when you said about, delayed gratification, I'm like, it makes total sense that I'm actually not what I say I am when it comes to delayed gratification. It makes more sense now.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna lie, I still struggle with deloads.
Yeah.
The only difference is now when I say I need a deload, I feel it.
Yeah.
Like I feel pain
Physically.
in like physical pain, and I just don't like being in pain. Like I've spent so
Yeah.
much of my life as an athlete being in pain that I just don't want that to be a part of my process anymore. And like I know how good training feels when everything feels good.
Yeah.
You know, when your knees, your joints, your positions, you're feeling mobile, things are feeling light. I want to have more of that in my training. Whereas when I was pushing too hard, not taking the breaks, I was experiencing so much more of the opposite. Like everything felt heavy. Warm ups had to be so long and extended. Everything hurt. And I'm just at a point in my life now where it's like, I don't want that. It's not worth it for me anymore. And I also know through experience, because I collected the evidence myself, that actually doesn't help me improve in the long run.
Yeah.
Right. And if I can spend more time training with quality and being pain free, that's actually going to allow me to become physically a better specimen and a better athlete anyway. So I had to go through all that to be in this position now where I can say that. So, now taking a break, it's like, yeah, I'd much rather be training hard because I love training.
Yeah.
But I know that when I come back next week after taking it easy, like everything's going to feel good. And like those are the best sessions, when you come in and everything's just firing and everything just feels awesome. You're hitting PRs. Like I want that feeling more.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I'm wrestling with at the moment, is I'm realizing I still probably do too much. Like I could still probably do less and still continue to get stronger and fitter and achieve all the things I want, with things like the CrossFit Open and quarterfinals. I probably still push a bit too much volume, and it's way less than I used to.
Yeah.
It's way less than everyone else I train with here at Coastal, but I still think like I don't actually need it. I've been going through a phase now of almost 4 weeks of not being able to do Olympic lifting because of my knee and not being able to squat. But actually, in the first couple of weeks, there was a lot of resistance to that because there was partly a lot of fear around, oh my God, I'm going to lose all my gains and all the hard work I've done. I'm not going to be able to do it in the open. But now it's more of a position of acceptance and be like, actually I've done all the work. And at the end of the day, what's actually most important to me? Like, I want to be pain free. I want to be healthy. If I can do the open and do it pain free, that's going to be awesome. So why push today and potentially push back the recovery process by a week or 2 weeks just because I want to be able to do something now? So again, I still have to wrestle with delayed gratification and remind myself why it's so important. I think as human beings, we're very naturally geared towards wanting things now, and having to be patient and wait for things isn't something that is ingrained in our DNA. So I think we all just need to be a bit, if you're like you and I, where we're beating ourselves up for not having delayed gratification, then also just being a bit kinder to yourself to understand that it's part of who we are. It's part of what makes us human beings, because we need to survive now. Our body doesn't give a shit about what happens in 4 weeks. We got to get through today. And because that's so hardwired in us, that's always going to be how we think about things.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder for me, about delayed gratification and that feeling of firing on all fronts. I've had that before, where I've had deloads after comps and I've come back and I feel great. I think that's a good reminder for myself.
Nice. Karan, this has been an absolute pleasure my
Before
friend.
we sign off, Ed,
What?
where can
you
we
want?
learn more about
Oh.
these phases and how to program for athletes?
Yes. Well, first place is the podcast. We've done lots of episodes in the past where we kind of pick a subject on programming and we kind of dive into it. It's an area that I love talking about. I know it's an area that you're starting to love more and more.
Yeah.
So I want to bring this back to the podcast a bit more. So that's one resource. But of course, the individual coaching course, the process education, we've got an Instagram page out there now. We are currently rolling out our second cohort. So our second group of coaches are working their way through the individual coaching course where we dig into all this kind of stuff. We talk about assessments, how to onboard people, how to write amazing resistance training programs, how to write conditioning and energy system programs, how to blend those two together, talk about lifestyle, nutrition and behaviors. And then we talk about like how to develop yourself as a coach and professional. And I mean, I know this is biased, but that course is a product of 15 years of coaching experience for me. Actually more than that, the 10 plus years before that as an athlete working with great coaches. It took us 3 years to finish, from filming that first video to launching it, and it is a really damn great course. And it's only going to get better. We've got so many great ideas of what we can do more. So if you are someone who's interested in doing that, it's not specific to the sport of CrossFit. It's all about principles that you can then apply to any sport, any modality, any client with any goal. So thank you for reminding me on that, Karan.
Real quick, Ed, when's the next cohort starting?
Next cohort is going to be starting in April 2024. So we're going to be rolling out these cohorts every 4 months. About every quarter. That's that's 3 months, isn't it?
Yeah.
Roughly 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
The course, there's over 24 hours of video content.
Yeah.
There's a supporting booklet to work through. All course students will have 6 calls that they have to do with us as a group where we wrap up each stage. There are assignments and assessments for each stage as well. So you're submitting over 12 assignments, which are marked by our education team and given back to you so that you're actually learning and understanding how to implement all this stuff. So yeah, just basically, I'd say to you guys, make sure you follow the process education so you can stay up to date with when next courses are coming out. And we'd love to have you.
So we sign up on email or through the process education Instagram?
Yes, head to process education and then all the links are on there.
Perfect. Awesome.
Okay, I'll finish my sign off once again. Karan, Sanjeev, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. No, thank you very much for joining me. Really enjoy having you on this podcast, and I know we both love talking about this kind of stuff. So it was good to share some stories as well.
Likewise, Ed. Thank you so much.